Hello and welcome back to LDF-Designs. In today's video I'm going to work on these two pieces that I started earlier. I have a video that you can see where I created the underpainting for these. I will put a link to that in the description below. But at this point I have added plaster, concrete, different materials, some rusty items, and I have let all of that dry. And I am just now putting my first layers of encaustic onto these pieces. My intent for these was to create a lot of texture, and I'm using some clear encaustic and white encaustic to get started and create as much texture as I can. These panels that I'm working on are made by Ampersand. They are gallery depth, and I believe they are 5x5 panels. They were pre-gessoed and really intended to be used with acrylic paint or mixed media. But because I wanted to use the encaustic, I decided to put the concrete and plaster on the surface first so that would be absorbent to the encaustic. As usual, once I create some texture, I often will take oil paints and rub the different colors on to create depth and shadows, and then I will use vegetable oil to pull off the excess oil paint. If you're not familiar with the encaustic, it is a wax-based medium, and you apply it when it's in a molten state or melted. It does have a damar resin, which is a tree resin, mixed into it that gives it a little longevity and a higher melting temperature. So once I create the texture with the encaustic, I can put the oil paint in there and it will pick up all of the different cracks and holes and texture that I've made, giving it a lot of interest. At this point I pulled out a little bit of some lace that I have in my shelves, and I went ahead and dipped those into the encaustic, the clear encaustic, and adhered those onto the piece. And then when I use my white encaustic, and I do a process called accretion where I am building up the different layers, and it makes a neat pattern with the lace, which I'll show you closer here in just a little bit. One of the tricks to creating accretion is having the wax at the right temperature. It's really something that you learn the more you work with the encaustic. When it is in different states of temperature, it allows you to do different things to it. If it's really warm and you're trying to build it up, it melts, and it doesn't build the texture up quite as quickly or maybe in the pattern that you're looking for. So the trick is to let it cool on the brush slightly before you start applying it, and then you just want to take the brush and go back and forth multiple times to build the wax up. At this point I realized that really a lot of the different texture that I created with those different materials in the beginning is completely covered up, but I do like to use them as a base to create this type of rich, thick texture. I wanted to bring back some of that material feel or the softer feel, so I started pulling some different fabrics out that I have, some cheesecloth and some cotton cloth, and sometimes I would lay it on there and put a little bit of encaustic over it to kind of tack it down, and sometimes I would dip the material into the encaustic and adhere it onto the piece. But either way, once this encaustic cools and sets completely, then this material won't go anywhere. It will stay on there, but also still hold its material look and feel. I was adding a mixture of black oil paint and a Payne's gray, kind of going back and forth between those two colors to create some really nice contrasting work on top of the piece. Some of the staples in the material that I had applied originally it was still there, you could see it, but it would definitely push to the background. And I decided I wanted to bring that back out to the front a little bit. So I created another piece and put staples in it. And I decided to take some oil pastels and put a spot of color on this piece. And I really ended up loving how this one turned out. But again, I applied some oil pastel, rubbed it into the encaustic, fused it, and then used another color to contrast it. And it worked out pretty well. It's something that I haven't tried very often, but I did really like the impact. I set it aside because I thought maybe I was done with it, but still wanted to tweak it just a little bit, so pulled it back to the front of my table, added a second color to give it a little more depth of color. And I knew that if I touched the encaustic onto that oil pastel, it would pull up into the brush. So I dripped some encaustic over that and then fused it, and it set in very nicely. So at this point, I decided to start working on the second piece and wanted to try that oil pastel process a little differently this time. I didn't have as much encaustic on this section of the painting when I started applying the oil pastel. There was some encaustic, it just wasn't on there very thick. Originally I thought I wanted that whole top section to be kind of that rusty color, but as you'll see when I continue to work with this, it didn't quite go how I expected, and I kept doing things, taking them back off, rearranging, pulling it out. But in the end I ended up with a piece that I really liked. It's always interesting to me when you're using the same materials and the same colors on two different pieces, and how one will come together so easily and effortlessly, it seems like, and then other ones you just struggle and struggle and struggle with. And I find that to be the case often when I work on two or three at the same time. I definitely do better when I concentrate on one piece at a time. I put that black oil pastel line on this painting, and it was much thicker than what I anticipated, and as soon as I did it I knew I didn't like it. From the camera angle it's not so bad, but it definitely was a bold mark, and so I'm going to spend the next few minutes trying to sort out how to soften that just a little bit and work it into the painting so that it looks like it belongs there. One of the tricks that I tried was adding a little bit of encaustic and then putting heat to it so that it would soften it and run down all of those material pieces that I just added. That definitely helped, and you'll see here as I keep going, I keep putting the black on and then pulling it back out or covering it back up. Just couldn't quite get this one situated as easily as that first piece. I can't help but laugh a little bit when I watch the playback because I kept spinning the painting thinking maybe it'll look better from this direction, or maybe it'll look better from this direction. But no matter what I did, I just wasn't happy with the black and the rust colors. So I kept adding white paint, then I would add the color or the black back and forth I went. It was quite an interesting adventure getting this piece to come together. Surely I'm not the only one out there that has had this problem. Then I put this line on, and again at first wasn't so sure about it, but was trying to sit with it for a little bit and talk myself into it. But in the end, I didn't like that either. One of the fantastic features about Encaustic is that often you have the ability to just scrape off whatever you did. The other trick about the oil pastels is the vegetable oil will also help take those off the surface. Um, I realized as I started pulling that black back off of there that my cheesecloth was rolled up, and that worked into my advantage because I was able to unroll it a little bit and add some more white paint and white encaustic, and that helped. Interestingly, as I wrap this piece up here at the end of this video, I shut the camera off and I still ended up going back and adding a lot more white to it. So if you want to check the finished piece out on my Instagram, I'll have it over there for you so you can see the pieces, how they actually turned out in the end. So I thank you for joining me today, and I'm just about ready to finish this up. And again, check out how they turned out over on Instagram if you'd like. But this is one of the ways that I have found to build up big texture. Give me a like and a subscribe. Leave me a comment. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for joining me. We'll see you next time.